I now invite His Excellency Salvador Valdes Mesa, Vice President of the Republic of Cuba and Chairperson of the Group of 77 and China, to address us.
Gracias, estimado presidente Yoweri Museveni, estimados jefes de Estado y de Gobierno.
Esteemed heads of state and government and heads of delegations. It is a great honor and privilege to participate in this important event in the African continent. Apparently there seems to be an issue with the microphone, says the interpreter. It is a great honor and privilege to participate in this important event here in Africa. Africa is the land of our ancestors. Africa is part of the essence of our homeland and of the community. This year, which marks the 50th anniversary of the establishment of our bilateral relations, it was an honor to visit the sister nation of Uganda and reaffirm the historical bonds of friendship and cooperation that unite us. We are holding this 19th summit after more than 6 decades of joint efforts aimed at preserving the unity of the non-aligned countries' movement and coping with huge external pressures intended to divide and weaken the movement. We are the main forum for political coordination of the countries of the South, in defense of peace, independence, and the development of our peoples. Our distinctive diversity is our strength. It allows us to find consensus amidst different viewpoints based on the principles and values that we share. The non-aligned movement has been a leading advocate of many just causes in the world, among them the struggle against colonialism, neocolonialism, fascism, racism, and apartheid. Our movement promoted key initiatives in favor of development, such as the achievement of a new international economic order. It has raised its voice several times against aggressions, against war, and the imposition of unfair sanctions and unilateral coercive measures against our nations. Today, faced with new global challenges, it is essential, it is imperative that we keep our forces united. We need to coordinate positions and ensure that our voice is heard in defense of the aspirations and just demands of our peoples. Cuba, in its condition as chair of the Group of 77 and China, has undertaken to promote unity, solidarity, and cooperation among the countries of the South. We urgently need to coordinate our nations in the face of the current international order, which is deeply unjust, it is excluding, and it is discriminatory towards our peoples. We reaffirm our strong rejection against the implementation of unilateral coercive measures which have been imposed on several members of our movement. Cuba would like to underscore its support to the right of the people of Western Sahara to self-determination. We express also our unequivocal support to the right of Puerto Rico to exercise its self-determination and independence. Excellencies, since last October the 7th, we have been witness to one of the cruelest genocidal acts ever to be recorded by history. With impunity and repulsive brutality, Israel has submitted the Palestinian people to a collective punishment that has already taken the lives of more than 20,000 innocent civilians as its toll. How can the Western countries, who claim to be so civilized, justify the murder of women and children in Gaza, the indiscriminate bombings of hospitals and schools, and the deprivation of access to safe water and food? We could further ask, as was done by the historical leader of our Cuban Revolution, Fidel Castro, in a summit like this back in 1979. Is it not true that we can observe in this irrefutable demonstration of imperialism's aggressive role and the kind of order and peace they would wish to impose on our peoples? Cuba suggests the non-aligned movement being consistent with the historical support to the Palestinian people. The non-aligned movement should, as I said, carry out without further delay 4 practical actions as a contribution to the efforts intended to halt the current act of barbarism. 1. Call for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and the rest of the occupied Palestinian territories in all possible forums. 2. To support the urgent dispatch of an international protection mission authorized by the UN General Assembly to the Gaza Strip, with a key mandate to guarantee the security and protection of the civilian population and facilitate the delivery of emergency humanitarian aid, including water and foodstuffs. 3. To convene a resumed emergency special session of the United Nations General Assembly, where the NAM would propose a resolution calling for the convening of a peace conference under the auspices of the United Nations that would make it possible to preserve the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, including its right to have an independent and sovereign state within the borders prior to 1967, with East Jerusalem as its capital, or calling the prompt incorporation of the State of Palestine as a fully fledged member state of the United Nations. Excellencies, every historical epoch brings about its own challenges, and the current times bring about challenges which are key and decisive for the future of humanity. The current global order in force is characterized by multiple crises: extreme social polarization, increasing asymmetries, geopolitical conflicts, and an erosion and weakening of multilateralism. Exclusion, ethnicity, and inequality continue to perpetuate. The international financial architecture designed by the wealthiest countries for their own benefit continues to be a stumbling block to the developmental aspirations of our nations. At the current rate of progress, none of the agreed 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, would be or could be achieved. Yet we face the fact that military budgets are reaching exorbitant figures. Climate change is threatening the survival of the human species. And our countries, the ones that least contribute to the environmental crisis, are the ones which are most vulnerable to its impact. The financial commitments entered into by the industrialized countries, the ones that bear primary responsibility for depredation and global overheating, are very insufficient. From the South, let us call for an urgent democratization of the international relations system. This is what we stated in September last during the summit of the G77+China that we were honored to host in Havana. It is possible to guarantee proud, prosperous and sustainable living standards for the majorities, the great majorities of this population, so long as the huge capacities that are there and exist to create wealth and well-being are used equitably and fairly. Only cooperation and solidarity among all countries will be effective to be able to cope with the colossal challenges of present and future times. The wealthiest countries have no excuses not to meet their commitment to assign at least 0.7% of their gross domestic product to official development assistance. It is shocking that the nations of the South should have to allocate at least 14% of their income to pay for interests associated to foreign debt, and that the least developed countries are paying interest rates that are 8 times higher than those of developed countries. I reaffirm Cuba's commitment to international fraternal cooperation, in particular South-South cooperation, based on mutual respect, selfless assistance, and complementarity. Despite our limited resources and the brutal blockade that we have faced in Cuba, we shall maintain our cooperation with other countries in need to the extent of our possibilities, following our principle of sharing with modesty what we have. Dear participants, Washington's economic warfare against Cuba has not ceased for a single day for more than 60 years. There is not a single Cuban family spared from its terrible effects. It is the longest-lasting, most comprehensive and cruelest system of unilateral coercive measures that have ever been imposed against any nation, designed to force the surrender of an entire people via hunger and desperation. The criminal and illegal economic, commercial and financial blockade imposed by the United States against Cuba has reached unprecedented levels of aggressiveness and has been reinforced to extremes, and is thus becoming the main stumbling block to the development, to the dreams of prosperity and development of more than 11 million Cubans. In these circumstances, we appreciate even more the firm rejection expressed by the non-aligned movement against its criminal policy. On behalf of our people, I also thank the members of the NAM for their rejection of the unwarranted inclusion of Cuba in the unilateral and spurious list drawn up by the United States of states sponsors of terrorism. This immoral and unfounded action by the United States government has curtailed to very high levels the flow of financial resources into our country, led them to a minimum. It is an insult to the truth and an outrage to all Cubans who have been victims of many terrorist acts perpetrated from the US territory against us for decades, even now as I speak. Brothers and sisters, we would like to thank and congratulate Azerbaijan for its outstanding work in running this movement during a particularly complex period marked by the COVID-19 pandemic, which demanded additional efforts on all of us. We wish Uganda the greatest of success as President of the movement during the 2024-2026 triennial, and it will always be able to count on Cuba's full support. We have struggled together to get to where we are now, and together we have won transcendental victories for our nations. Together we shall continue to wage the necessary battle for a proud, just, prosperous and sustainable future for our peoples. And Cuba will always be on the front line of that battle. We should not forget the words of the historical leader of the Cuban Revolution when, during the summit of our movement in Cartagena de Indias almost 30 years ago, and which today are more valid than ever, and I quote, "We are not mere spectators. The world is also our world. No one can replace our united action. Nobody will speak on our behalf. Oh, we alone, and only united, can reject the unjust world economic and political order that they would like to impose on our people." Thank you very much.